So I worked with Fancy Fish Games on a game jam, and the game jam used to be for something called one game a month, and we worked on I Can't Escape, which is a Flash game that's still on Newgrounds to this day. And like I always tell people, do game jams, and I'm telling you, like that's it. So that's typically how we got in contact with one another. They were looking for a composer. I reached out. I did an extra track just to show them that I was serious because I just could. I had the time. I was still in school, and so they took that as, yeah, this person is really interested. I want to work with them, and we just did the jam, and then they just asked me to do the next jam, and then eventually we worked on the commercial projects together.
So how did you go from the jam to the final game, the Aground? What was that transition?
Well, there's several projects involved in working with Fancy Fish Games, from I Can't Escape to I Can't Escape Darkness to Deity Quest to Reality and then to Aground. But at least most of those were shipped games. Most of those got at least some kind of traction at least within my career, in terms of a nomination of Best Artist of the Year with the I Can Escape soundtrack. And then the Deity Quest not doing terribly and pretty successful in its right. So the developers always has a design idea, so it was just a matter of just scaling forward. And there was even a game jam that happened before Ground that we did with a new artist, and this is crucial because the artist was I think the missing picture within Fancy Fish Games. We have one. It's the developer has his wife, and her name's Natalie, and she is an artist, but someone that was just a little bit faster with the style that would fit. And so coming from Reality, which is the visual novel that we shipped and worked on together, right into into that game jam, then into the prototype. There was another game that was being worked on, but I wasn't a part of that. There's actually two, and then into like Aground. So there's a little bit of different paths. Nothing concrete or direct, but ideally, really, is what will happen was two game jams happen with a specific artist and that programmer that was not a part of Fancy Fish, and they just started to work on the prototype of Aground, they designed it within, I want to say, 2 months. Then I had always been a part of it, but I was busy. It was in my senior year of my third college. So I was like, look, unless we're really doing this, I'm going to focus on graduating.
Mhm. So like focusing on the game now, like I noticed that game is sort of like a 2D kind of voxel type of look to it. And of course the soundtrack kind of fits that. So what were kind of the inspirations behind the score of the game?
Really the art. Aaron Norrell is the artist of Aground, and he's very fast. He's one of the fastest artists to be doing it all himself. Typically art takes at least a team of 2 or more, up to 10, or even maybe I want to go out on a limb and say 20 people. It depends on obviously the scale of the game that you're working on, but to do it all yourself is I can relate, because I did all of the sound and the music foreground. I haven't even calculated the amount of sound effects I did for that yet, but a 37 track album now, and around 35 to 37 tracks, it's been a lot. So the artist really took this aesthetic, and he was really inspired by retro things, and the developer David from Fancy Fish, he was inspired by retro stuff. So I guess their ideas together pretty much conflated what it would be. I figure you'll see a lot of this in the industry. It's easier to kind of design 2D games rather than 3D. It's just it's less costly. So I really just ran with the art. The story really unfolded as the game was being developed per month. There was a lot already. I don't want to, discredit any of the work that was done, but it still expanded within every 3 months. There was a huge expansion of the story, and more and more and more back and forth, like daily Slack channel chats nonstop. But when art was posted is really what I thrived on the most, because just to kind of read in between the lines would be kind of going a little bit in between whatever the inspiration would kind of like focus on. And I already had, it took me 3 months to write the theme of Aground initially anyway, because nothing really came to me right off the bat, because it wasn't intimidating. It was just more, it was more about listening to what the game build was telling me. And the game build didn't tell me it right away. I knew it was fun. I knew it was good, but there was something different about it that from all the other builds that it just didn't hit me right away.
Mm.
So on top of having an audio asset sheet, like there was a lot of different things that were described to what they wanted it to be like. And even the artist himself, when I did the first theme, he didn't think it would work. He wasn't sure. And it was a lot of ambiguity. And I was like, okay, well, try it with the players, because that's really what the end result is. And that's really what I want. And then when the players really took onto it, he's like, oh, you've changed my mind. I had no idea. At first, I wasn't really sure this was going to work. I had a different idea about this. And I was like, take your time with stuff. It really comes out.
So for the song that the next music design episode will be featured on, how did you come about creating the song? Like, what was the first idea you had for it?
You know, it's difficult to answer this one because, well, not really. The first idea was to read the audio asset sheet, which I actually have to have in front of me. So the comments were to say, like, industrial age technology played in the science island town. Underground variant is the same as island one. So what that means is the developer was conveying to me, for those who haven't played Aground, you have two paths you can do in the beginning of the game. You can do a magic path, or you can do a science path. It's not necessarily determined based off of a menu screen or any type of UI. It unfolds as you play the game once you start. And then as you unfold and meet different NPCs, it takes you around that way. It's not you choose in the beginning, because you can change your path at any time. But going towards the science path, they wanted it to be, once you leave a specific island, what is that island going to be? What is that going to represent? And so the specificity of understanding where I took the primitive tech track for when the player is underground, and then adding on to it, but making it industrial sounding, that is where my mindset was. Even though I was playing the game, there's a lot of, obviously, like, we're talking about robots, we're talking about power plants, we're talking about anything like bigger minerals like uranium and titanium, and versus just, and maybe a couple more diamonds versus just finding sulfur or whatever else, coal that you found on a different island. So it's about understanding what those terminology words mean, and then creating a sound world around it. They wanted it to be a variant. I decided to go a different direction and just create something completely on its own. And I wasn't really sure about it when I made it, but again, it's about writing ideas and then figuring out and then testing and going over and such. So as I look back at my sessions, it started it on April 13th, 2018, and I didn't finish it till May 11th, 2018. So it took me some time. But again, it's about progression of the overall game. So I know that the track cannot be monotonous. And that was for every challenge, for every single track on the game, is how do you expand? How does it progress? And how does it keep fresh and interesting? And I'd say those are the core ideas that I was thinking about at the time.
And I notice you do two things at least so it's not repetitive. Like, you first make sure it's a long loop. Industrial tech is around 4 minutes. And then the second thing is that there's so much variations in each of the instruments. Like, it's not like you just do one section and then loop it throughout the entire song. Like, there's so much little variances that I really like in your tune.
Thank you. Yes, that was another thing, is that within the audio asset sheet, they at least had an idea of how long they wanted the track to be. And so my goal was to meet that or over deliver, because if you're playing the game, you're not grinding, but you're mining, and you're collecting resources for quite some time. And my goal, like I said, is to not have the player turn the music off. My goal is for it to just be a part of the experience, and it be a subconscious thing that's seeping into your mind. It's not going to hit you right off the bat with melodies that you can sing. It's supposed to be absorbed with the entire experience of playing the game, because that is what I experienced with the early prototype, and that is the feel that I wanted to continue to contribute within, so the player could enjoy it.
So what were some of the limitations you placed on yourself for the score?
The sound palette. It was one of the limitations I definitely did. Keeping within the music theory form of through compose was a limitation as well. But that wasn't necessarily a limitation as it was a goal. But the sound palette was a little bit tricky, I would have to say, is because limiting how many instruments I wanted to use and reuse rather than adding more without and trying to get more of a sound. So in this regard, it kind of harkens back to how game tracks were made in 80s and 90s based off of their limitation of the consoles that they would have within the Super Nintendo, the SPC 700, or the Sega Genesis with the YM2612. You only have with the Nintendo, you have a VR6 versus the 2A03, which is 4 channels. Then you have 6 channels. So me, I was thinking, okay, well, let's just say I have a minimum of at least 8 channels, but I have a maximum of like 16 to 24 channels. But then I also needed to keep the world of every track being consistent with what it sounds like. And that was a big challenge in terms of just wanting to add more and figuring out how I can stretch things out and make things sound a little bit different. So I would have to say the sound palette was one of the biggest ones.
So was there any kind of music creation techniques that resulted in something interesting during the creation of the score?
Lots. I mean, constant modulations, different pauses. Like I mentioned before, the through compose techniques. I like to write in odd time signatures, and so there's one track in particular. Only one person has been able to figure it out for a specific song that I wrote in a time signature. I don't think it ever has been written in video game music history. So that I've used that type of technique as well. It was always trying to push myself based off of what the players loved from whatever was in the build before, how to make it better, not writing like myself from the track before, bettering myself, and aligning with the progression of the game. So there's so many things going on about like, wow, like what is it going to be like now? And there's times I had to kind of just jump around and not finish a track, as I was averaging at least a track a week. That means the complete conception, mix, delivery, tested, implementation, done, just going. But there were some that took a month, and especially near the end, it got more difficult and more difficult. But yeah, I was trying to think about any other. Oh, there was another technique, which is, I don't know, maybe I have the book here. I'm sure you'll be able to see it, but I do mention it. What is it called? Like a cryptograph. I use different techniques like that. Phone number chord progression ideas, things that I came up with. Here it is. I forgot what this is called, but this is in the journal. So I use an idea like that, whereas you can modulate to wherever. Even if you're in D major, you can go to D sharp minor, but from D sharp minor, you can go to the 3rd, or you can go to the 5th. So I'm doing this backwards or things like that. So lots of different things that I pulled out of nowhere. Really, I wouldn't say nowhere, but sometimes the schooling and such like that just kind of came back to me, and I just wanted to see what would happen if I did that, because it's, like I said, it's a long tracks plural, and you got to kind of keep it fresh. Most of the time, I would say though, a technique that I don't think a lot of people actually have, and I consider a gift, is I would dream some of the melodies ahead of time. So I'd wake up in the morning, and then I'd have the idea, and then I just hum it into my phone, and then I try to realize it. I think that was ACO, which is Avman Cosmic Odyssey, which is the main melody of kind of like what that came out to be, which is like one of the longer tracks on the soundtrack. I think it's like 6 minutes.
So on the implementation side, like how did you implement the music in Aground?
So Aground, there's hacks and there is OpenAL. And so the developer kind of expanded on, he's always expanding on the engine of the game he did before, except for Reality. That one was RenPy. But for example, the I Can Escape Darkness engine was pretty robust. We already tested some implementation directly without any audio middleware for layering and reverb and so on and so forth. And it just so happened that I took HTML class in 11th grade, and I did extremely well at it. I actually had the best website in my class at the time. So I just forgot. I know why that was, because I was trying to build a website for my own music stuff back then. And so I was just testing a bunch of stuff out. But I had no idea that the HTML code would translate into implementation for who I was going to meet later on, right? And so that's really how it came to be, is just he gave me the tips of the code that he expanded on based off of whatever engines and system software was already being utilized. And then it clicked to me that, oh, this is just direct HTML code. You just do, your brackets, you make sure your spaces are good, you know what line values that you need to do. And that's it. The music is actually easier to implement than the sound effects. The sound effects were more difficult, way more difficult than the music, because again, like I'm writing for islands and specific areas. So really just write the music, test it, and throw it in. But the sound effects, designing them and then having them work based off of specific actions, that was a really big challenge. So HTML code is really how it kind of came to be. No audio middleware, just directly into the engine.
So what is one lesson learned you took away from the entire project?
Be proactive. I'm usually proactive, but being more proactive, meaning we all have up and down days. Maybe we don't feel the best. Maybe there's something going on mentally up there, right? Or physically. Just try to at least write 2 measures. Just try to write 1 or 2 measures. It will say, you will always thank your past self in the future. I promise you. So be proactive.
And what is one personal habit of yours that leads to your daily success?
Mental prep before the next day. Understanding what you're going to do when you wake up. Having some kind of plan initially to kind of kickstart it, because maybe you don't sleep well, maybe your mind is kind of off, maybe you're distracted by something, but at least if you knew what was going to happen besides eating breakfast of some kind of action point, then that typically kind of propels you forward into your next priorities of what you need to do.
So any specific things you want to share?
So for me, I make like the night before, I empty my trash list in my email, or I star specific ones that I didn't get to that day, so that I know I'm going to I know that mentally I need to look at that for the next one. I think about what I didn't take care of that day, and I just put a priority tag next to what it is, what that action item is, and as a priority, I know in the morning, that's the first thing we're going to do after we stretch, after we read our industry news. That is what I'm sitting down and doing. I'm not going to read that email that just came in at 8 o'clock in the morning, because I'm going to focus on this, unless it does take priority mentally over that. But typically, most of the time, it doesn't.
So finally, is there any last parting words you would give to an aspiring video game composer?
Always do your homework. Always do your homework about those that help pave the way for you. Honestly, I can't mention enough how much it's helped me, and definitely learning about who they are as people really helps going forward in terms of like how that music is created. And I think that just kind of goes for like anything. I've found that when I was in school, learning about the classical composers helped me play their pieces better, and got me better performances and skill sets and so on and so forth. But like doing your homework about all the technology and everything that you really want to enjoy playing that game, doing more is definitely, I think, imperative, and always will be imperative as long as you want to work in an industry that you may want to be. But specifically video game industry, I think it'll help you a lot.
Awesome. Thank you, Chase, for sharing your wisdom for us. I appreciate how you strive to help other composers, to help just help become better people in general and composers. So thank you for this interview.
Thank you, Alec, for taking the time and wanting to do the interview with me. So I appreciate you.
Thank you.